Welcome to International Dairy Week's podcast, Around the Barn. We are so excited to be back for season 2. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Treloar, and this is the online space where those in the Australian dairy industry can connect with each other, as well as those right around the world in the lead up to Australia's premier dairy show in January. Through video and audio, this is the exclusive one-stop shop where you can catch up with our exhibitors, judges, sponsors and fans from across the globe to talk all things cows, technology and showing down under.
Privileged to have Katie Coyne here from Mill Wheel Show Clinics. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Good, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
No, fantastic. And a bit of history. I'm very good friends with Katie. We worked together over at Butlerview Farms in the US, and we had one of the best summers of our life, well, my life. I'm not going to say our lives, but one of the best summers of my life when we first went to the US. And we had some pretty good times and we worked with some pretty good cows, Katie. But maybe give us a little bit of introduction to yourself and a little bit of history, who Katie Coyne is.
Thank you. So, yeah, that was a fun summer for sure. It was 10 years ago, too. Went fast. So I was really privileged to grow up showing cattle at all levels. My dad was very big into showing, and we didn't have a big herd of cattle. Some years we just had whatever we bred on the farm, but did very well with it. I won my first national show almost 50 years ago with my own calf, and I've had the chance and privilege since then to show cattle for other people, as well as a lot of national show winners, actually, as well as we've bred quite a few and developed quite a few animals of our own. And my family still continues to do really well at the local, state, and national level. So I've taken some of that and developed it into a business, is what I've done with the show clinic business.
That's fantastic.
Take us behind the scenes. I mean, a showmanship sort of clinic business. How does that work? What do you do? I mean, are you teaching young kids? Are you teaching adults? Take us through what a clinic's like.
So that's an interesting piece. People said, well, how many other people do this? And I said, in the dairy industry, no one does it as their business. So in 2016, my daughter, Kelly Reynolds, who worked at Jonathan Alicia Lambs, developed the Growing Through Showing Day. It was a huge success. And when we went to I taught the showmanship part, which is what you talked about, Casey, before. And before we did it, the Purebred Dairy Cow Association, PDCA, sent us a note and said, we want you to be sure to teach these guidelines. And I did. When we got done with the day, though, I said, some of these rules and guidelines don't really make sense from a practical standpoint in the show ring. So they went back and did a little adjustment of what they had done for rules and things. And it's interesting, Declan, because they followed what happens in Canada. The kids in Canada have, and a lot of what I do is what I learned when I was in Canada, working for a year. But they're very dedicated to making their animal look 100% all the time. And so after 2016, I was doing some show clinic or some fitting demonstrations at NASCO, which was very close to my home at that time. And I met a person named Kirk Steerwalt, who is the guy for beef clinics. And if you know anything about beef, he also is the guy to teach you how to grow hair and keep their hides healthy and all that. So I was really fortunate to work with him one day, and I thought, I think I could, he does 2 and 3 day clinics all the time, all year long. So I thought, I think I could do this. So I approached Weaver Livestock, who I am a pro staff member with, and they have great products for livestock, for growing hair or taking care of the hide of hogs or the wool of lambs or whatever. So they said, well, we'll try this for a year. They didn't have a big following in dairy at all. So we tried it for a year, and then they put me on their pro staff, and they partner with me and send a very wonderful clinic pack to every clinic. So every youth at a clinic goes away with some great products. So my clinic, so that's how the clinic got started. And now it's grown into, this is what I do. This is my business. And I've traveled all across the country In 2022, there will literally be thousands of youth who have come to a Millville Show clinic.
That's amazing.
It's been fun.
That's incredible, isn't it, Katie? So tell me about 2022. Let's touch on that right now. How many kids are you expecting to see? How many clinics are you doing around the US? And how does that look like for you?
So I'll have done about 40 clinics by the end of August. This week alone, I have 4. So it's a busy week. I'm doing 4 clinics and judging 2 shows this week. So it'll be interesting. My show cattle are going to suffer. There will be, I'll probably have reached, there's usually about 40 youth at a clinic. Now I did one in California earlier this spring and there were 90. And I'm doing one later this week with 60 youth. But most of them have about 40 youth at them, and there's about 40 clinics. So, and then there's a lot of one-on-one coaching. People send me a message on Facebook or send me a little text or a video or something and say, what about this? And how do I do it this? So it's really been interesting and fun to develop. I like to build things no matter what. So that's how it's gone.
Katie, I mean, obviously you're based in the US. Declan and I have done plenty of travel in the US. Declan a lot more than I. But you go to the World Dairy Expos, you go to the Royal Wool Fairs, and you see time and time again that the lead strapsmen, taking those animals to the top of the line. They just look so seamless doing it. How important is it getting the right leader on the halter of the animal in the ring when it comes to those big shows and wanting to do well?
To me, it's the most important thing. I've gotten to show for Arethusa and in the old days, Pinehurst and Lylehaven and some of those, and it's really important to do that. And that's one of the most important things I teach youth is that the most important rule of showmanship is to make your animal look as good as she can at all times. The second part of it is to know the rules of showmanship. And those rules have been developed to follow rule number 1 to make your animal look as good as she can. So it's really important to get the right person. It's really important for that person to be natural at it. It's really important for that person to be able to see what they have to do to make the animal look as good as she can. So yesterday I was talking to this young lady and I said, you've got to teach this heifer how to take shorter steps because she takes really large steps with her left hind leg. And she just looked at me like I was crazy. And I was like, no, really, you stand back here and watch. And she did. And she said, oh, I see it. So it's really important to have the right showman and a showman who looks seamless. And lots of times when I'm judging showmanship, I'll say to a young person, I didn't even notice you when you came in and you've worked your way to the top because I still don't notice you. I'm still just looking at your heifer. And so it's key.
Yeah, I remember, Katie, when I started leading cattle back in the day. Well, I was 4 years old with no shoes on. I remember seeing a picture like that. But obviously, there is so many tricks to the trade, and there's so many people that are passionate about showmanship. And that's what I remember growing up, and it was a passion of mine. I absolutely loved showmanship. But I think one of the things that we were taught when we were young was that a lot of people, showmen, just get on the halter and they lead the animal, but they don't look at the animal, right? And like what you just mentioned about the way that heifer, she stepped with her left leg, a lot of people is you've got to analyze your animal to know how to make that animal look better, right? So I guess what are your thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, well, I'm not big on asking questions in the show ring, but a question that's important for judges to ask young showmen is what's a fault in your heifer and how do you show that out of them? And that is really important. And when I'm doing a clinic, I say to parents, you need to lead the heifer around your driveway or wherever you lead heifers on the lawn so that your children can see what's the problem with the heifer and how are you going to show that out of them. We have a brown Swiss calf that loves to keep her head really, really high in the air. And so when we show her at Madison this fall, our leadsman has to make sure that they keep that head down a little bit. Not that she has any faults at all, but just when she gets her head up, it just looks weird. And you've got to know what the fault is. I start every clinic and say, how many people go dairy judging? And it's amazing to me the number of people who show who don't go dairy judging. But to me, you have to have some basics of knowing what is good about cattle and what needs to be improved in order to fit or to show.
Now, Katie, I must admit, when I was growing up, it was my mum that taught me showmanship, and my mum had a background in horses, so she didn't know a whole lot about showing dairy cattle. But certainly, I mean, she made us work hard at home and made us do lots and lots of practice. And the one thing I'll never forget it is, make sure you look at the judge. Make sure you look at the judge. And I guess you can get a little bit overwhelmed in terms of, looking at the judge, but also trying to keep control of your animal and making sure you're not running into the person behind you. I came across one of your workshops where you went into detail about where to look. Can you take us through, maybe some advice for people that might get a bit overwhelmed of where to look when in the ring?
Sure. And I say to people, I learn something at every clinic. I've actually changed my wording a little bit this summer. When I'm teaching the fitting portion of the clinic, I talk a lot about the grow bone. So right at the top of the rump in front of the tail head. And I say to the youth, the grow bone, you're going to clip the rest off around it so it blends in. And I talk about the grow bone 3 or 4 times during the clipping part. Then when we get to the showmanship part of a clinic, I say, remember when we talked about that grow bone? And the reason that I talk about that is when you're walking, I want you to take one step and look at the grow bone, and the next step and look at the judge and do it, and I teach them. I don't want you to just glance with your eyes. I want you to actually move your head from that grow bone to the judge, from the grow bone to the judge, because I had a young lady yesterday that I was teaching her how to walk and step with her front legs. She's very advanced showman. And I said, stop looking at her front legs. Those are there. The head is there. It's in your hand. So look back at the back of your heifer and then over to the judge. And it looks totally different from a judge's perspective than just someone staring at a judge or staring at your heifer or staring at the ground or whatever. So I use a lot of terminology. I have a little bit of a background in education. And so a lot of my terminology evolves as I'm going along so that 9-year-olds as well as 18 or 20-year-olds understand what I'm talking about when I'm teaching. So
I must admit, Katie, I've judged a couple of showmanships, not too many, but I have judged a couple. And I do remember a young guy, and he was doing a great job, but the whole time he was staring me down. And it was almost to the point where I was uncomfortable. So I certainly, understand you've got to have that balance. And being that judge, my parents always like, pay attention to the judge, pay attention to the judge. But, being on that other side of it, and witnessing that, I was just like, okay. I mean, he didn't win, unfortunately, but, he just, because he wasn't paying enough attention to the heifer, right? So, but as the judge are being stared down, I was like, all right, well, this is awkward. So that balance is, and it's great now, I don't do so much showing anymore, but it's great to be on the other end of it and to understand from the judge's perspective as well, so.
Well, and the showmanship piece of it, and I say this to people all the time, is as Casey talked about before, you aspire to be that showman that people ask to show their really good cattle. And if you're at the World Dairy Expo or International Dairy Week or the Royal Winter Fair and you're not watching the judge, you're staring at the ground, you're going to miss your pull. And at that show, you're not getting a second chance. In the same way, if you're at those shows and your heifer's walking sideways or doing things you don't want her to be doing, you're staring at the judge, you're missing what your heifer's doing. So it has to be a balance.
100%.
I guess probably another, a point of discussion that quite often comes up in Australia is when it comes to setting legs, probably in particular in heifers where they, they're still trying to find their feet and they may not have found their feet yet when they do hit the ring. What's your take on when it comes to adjusting legs? Is it all in hand and halter movement, or can you use your feet on their feet?
Well, that's a great question because it's always a debate here in the U.S. First of all, if you always go back to that rule number 1, make your heifer look as good as she can, I think there are always going to be times where you have to use your feet to move those front feet. So what I teach is set your back legs up first, and that of course would be the back leg towards the judge is back to make your heifer appear long, and then set your front feet up. And so once you get those back feet set up and so they're nice and balanced, go ahead and move those front feet. And I think you can use the halter. I think you can use your hand on the shoulder, and with a little bit of really discreet movement, move those front feet where you need them to be. But I don't think you should ever touch the back feet with your feet. It's just too distracting. It's too much of a project, so to speak, to do that and do it naturally. So just using the front feet. And in the US, our guidelines say that you can use your feet to do that. And again, it goes back to, we want to teach youth what we do in the adult show ring, and I want to use my feet to set those front feet. So I want to teach youth how to do that, but do it well. So I teach them to step right into the heifer. First of all, know which way you're going with those front feet. So many times I see showmen trying to move a foot back and it needs to go forward. So that's important to know, but step right in, touch the foot either right above the hoof or under the dew claw to move it forward or backward, and use a little pressure on the halter as well. So so that you get, so it just looks really natural. You see kids kicking the front feet or something. I'm like, no, don't do that. So, but I don't really teach them to move front feet with their feet. I teach them that they've just got to keep doing it until their heifer stops and you put your hand on their shoulder and they just plant their front feet, which is doable for good-legged heifers.
Yeah. The kicking story, the kicking comment reminds me of a story, Katie, when I was a young boy. Not many people in the dairy industry know my brother, but my brother and me, he was an older brother. And obviously you've got that rivalry, right? So we would go to shows and I was very passionate about showmanship in the dairy industry. He wasn't, he just wanted to win the $20, right? So we would be walking around and we'd be in the lineup and I'd be first or second and with him, and he'd be, when the judge wouldn't be looking, he'd be kicking my heifer's feet. just so my heifer would look bad, you know? So, and it worked many times. So he was, he was a trickster, but don't teach that kid. Don't do that.
Yeah.
I am fascinated, Katie, some things that, the biggest tips that you have, and then maybe some things that you shouldn't do as a showman. Obviously, we just talked about feet, but, are there things that stand out to you when you're at shows and you're seeing or teaching the clinics that, that some things that you really should do and some things that you should definitely not do?
Well, I think, some important things, and sometimes at clinics, I don't even think about talking about this because I'm with a little more advanced group, but of course, keep the head up and keep the head straight. We're seeing a trend in showing where the showmen get to the side of the heifer and they're pulling the nose towards them, which shortens the length of your heifer. So you really want to stay out in front of your heifer and keep that nose straight. I like to see people moving at a really natural pace. I always talk about, if you looked out and your heifer was walking across the barnyard or across the pasture, what is the pace that she naturally walks at? And to me, that's the pace we should be using when we enter the ring and when we go to the line, when we're pulled to the line. When a showman's walking really, really slowly, my first thought as a judge is, does she have bad legs? Or are you just walking slowly? So, and to me, it's not fair. Our job as a judge is to compare the first animal in the class to the last animal. And if someone comes in walking really, really slowly, the rest of the class is still outside of the ring, and I can't begin comparing until everyone's in the ring. So we want people to walk at that nice, natural, efficient, I call it an efficient pace, into the ring, and don't go too slow or too fast. Walk with the head up. I also teach youth, and this is something I learned from the youth in Canada, and Bert Stewart and some of the leaders in Canada is, I teach them to have that halter wrapped in a nice, in a loose wrap, but in a nice circle so that it's nice and neat, so that when you look underneath the heifer's head, there isn't a sloppy lead strap hanging down and things like that. So I want that to look really nice. Make sure your halter fits correctly. And we talk about if it's too long, it bothers them. If it's too high, they don't have any sensitivity on the top of their nose. So make sure you have that halfway between their nostrils and their eyes, and just make it all look really natural. It's
Now, Katie, one thing for me that I think, I'd love to get your opinion on is, there's so many people that are passionate about showmanship, and there's a lot of people, and, Casey will know in this country, there's certain people that have really, really perfected the craft, and they go back every class and, they compete in the showmanship, and after time, it seems to be those people that are winning. And so for me, I always think, it can be discouraging to people that are trying to learn at the same time, and they're constantly competing against people that, seem to be always the winning, right? So what's your advice to those people that maybe haven't got the experience and maybe lose a little motivation or are disappointed when, those same people win all the time? What do you say to those people?
I think there's a couple parts to this question. One is go watch. I'm a visual learner, so all I have to do is watch someone ski or ride a horse or show their cow, and I can pick up what they're doing that I like and that I don't like. And so I think that's important, to just sit down and watch. And I say that all the time, is have senior showmanship first and have the younger kids sit and watch what they're doing, and watch and really learn, and sit with a parent or a leader or someone who can kind of talk about those good showmen. But the second part of this is Steve Fraser from Canada judged showmanship at the World Dare Expo about 5 or 6 years ago. And then he judged last fall because our judge couldn't come because of COVID restrictions. And he said, I cannot believe what has happened in the last 5 or 6 years in showmanship in the U.S. And the bottom line is there's lots of showmanship classes now that I'm judging. And I think every kid in this class has gone from 0, 10, 20 to 90, 95, 100. And so it's just that practice and dedication to learning.
Well, Katie Coyne, I tell you what, it's been an absolute privilege to have you join us on the podcast. I know I've, learned a few tips and tricks, and, we might be sort of not in the youth section anymore, but even us can definitely, people like Declan and I can learn things along the way too. So we absolutely appreciate your time, Katie, in spending some time with us on the podcast, and I hope plenty of our listeners can get plenty out of it. Well, we've now got Mike Ryan from Eagle Direct joining us on the Around the Barn podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Look, first of all, take us through a bit behind Eagle Direct, who they are, what you guys do.
Thanks, Casey. And I really appreciate being involved. I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing for our industry. To give you a background just on Eagle Direct, I guess it started back in 2007 when I was working in Ireland. There was a grant shed initiative from the European government that they were giving 80% of whatever the farmer spent on a shed for their cows, they were getting that back. And I guess we saw some amazing things, and a lot of steel go out and not much conversation around the cow. From that, after a certain amount of time of living in Ireland, I came back to Australia and started looking at the market, which I'd always been involved in agriculture and loved agriculture, wanted to get back in the industry, but a lot of my learnings that I learnt, I guess, working in Europe, and some of the looking at some of the importing arms that were coming through to the country. So I started importing Irish products into Australia and New Zealand, and we worked out that because I was so, I guess because I'd worked with a farmer for so long and directly with a farmer, I thought I could actually do that. So import products direct to the end user, and save the end user a lot of money, but also find some really good companies that they can deal with. So this just gives you a bit of background on, I guess, where Eagle Direct came from. And after a certain amount of time, I used to ring Quinton Moxie occasionally and say, Quinton, I've seen this product, what do you think? And Quinton was very patient and kind and go, oh, that's good, Mike, that's good. Until one day we sort of started talking just about their systems, and I guess they've been in these sort of systems, these full TMR systems since about 96. And they've found a lot of good people to work with around the world, and we really like the model. he liked the model about delivering direct to the end user. So we got broadened our horizons, and I guess I saw a whole different way of farming and being able to see professionals work in every different area of those. When you put cattle in a shed, you have all these different other issues, and you have to be able to have great problem solvers and great solutions to be able to solve those problems.
How have you seen or viewed or witnessed the transition in the Australian dairy industry going from that, very traditional pasture-based setup to implementing, the shedding and how it can be better for the cows?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, because we're seeing extreme heat, and probably with things like jewelry on animals, we're seeing responses. So we're seeing rumination responses, we're seeing lying time. So we can actually understand when some of our animals are in stress. And I think that's a really important thing, to sort of assess the situation and say, actually, we've done a bit of work with rumen boluses where it shows core body temperature in animals, and being able to say, right, that animal's in stress, how do we actually take that animal out of stress? And I think when we see extreme heat and we see extreme wet, like we've probably seen on the east coast of Australia, which has been really hard for a lot of people, like no matter who I talk to, everyone's pretty sad along that east coast with the amount of rain that's been happening, and that just people hate seeing that sort of things and seeing their cows in stress. And I think that's where farming is such a personal job, and when you see something, you want to be able to fix it. And I think as we look to that, we look at cow hotels, and that's the end. At the end of the day, I tell a lot of people that aren't on farm and don't understand farms, I say we help people into cow hotels.
Mike, when it comes to building or planning or designing a cow hotel, what are some of the key points to look for? Obviously, every farming enterprise is slightly different. They're going to have slightly different demands, whether that is extreme heat or the risk of flooding. What should people or farmers be looking at when they are maybe designing their own shed?
That's a really good question, and I think it's one of those things that we have to look back to where we get our income from and what we're actually farming, and most of the time it's the cow. We have to look at what the cow is and where she's happiest. We need to design everything around her comfort at the end of the day. And I use the analogy of when you're a new parent, you go in and you go to the shop to buy your baby gear, and they say, well, do you care about your animal? Not your animal, sorry. You care about your baby? And I say, of course I care about my baby. This is the most important thing ever. And they try to sell you everything under the sun, and you come out and you've spent $2,500 and you feel like you've spent nothing, or you've got nothing. So I think it's the same reverse. When we look at our animals or our cows, we just need to be able to have somewhere to feed them really successfully. We need to be able to deal with the poop. We need to be able to deal with the effluent side, and we need to make sure that we've got really somewhere comfortable to feed them. Comfortable for that animal to lay. So if they're laying, it's cow comfort's there. We're able to deliver feed to the animal, and we're able to deal with the effluent. They're the boxes we need to tick, and we need to be sure about those aspects. And I think one of the things everyone says, farming's great fun when, I'm in Queensland at the moment, it's 22 degrees, the sun's on your back, and you're seeing cattle just do amazing things because they love this. That's the temperature they really enjoy. But you've got to think about the worst time and think, if I'm in this system and I've got no other lever to pull, then are my cattle going to be happy? Are my cows going to be happy in this system? So you've got to think about the worst day and how you manage that at the end of the day. So really reflecting about the cow to start off with and how she's going to be happy the whole way through the year.
I guess in terms of when it comes to bedding, and you mentioned it a little bit before in terms of where the cow lays and what that cow would prefer and how she would best be comfortable, there's so many options. I mean, how do you choose between the different types of I guess the sizes of the beds, or if it's a water bed or sand based, or does it come down to personal preference for the farmer and their operation, or is there a model that you would personally, I guess, recommend?
Well, it's very difficult for me to recommend because I'm not milking cows. I'm not there on Sunday milking cows, and or not there bedding animals and moving animals through. So I think one of the aspects of the planning, Casey, is looking at making sure that you are fully aware and you're going into a system eyes wide open, and you've got to think about and say, right, as I said, on the worst possible day, what's this facility going to look like? How am I going to manage this? And I think that's probably the most important thing to look at. And a lot of people are going for pack barns at the moment, just because I think it's something we can all get our head around a little bit more. But there's some people that are going for the freestall option as well. I think what we need to realise probably in Australia and New Zealand, this is something that's not new, and I really do think, like, Europe's been doing it for, I don't know how long we've been farming for, thousands of years. 8,000 years we've been farming for. The US have opened this market up, and they've been probably doing it successfully for the last 30 or 40 years, and now we've got a huge opportunity. I really believe that we've got a huge opportunity to take aspects of each of those markets and what they've done, and really group it together to be able to create world-class facilities. And I think we could be in the position where people are actually coming to Australia to say, hey, have a look what these Australians have done to be able to bed their animals or these cow hotels we're making. So we could do that. We just need to do your research. And I think one of the things is visit as many facilities as you can, talk to as many farmers as you can, go to the US, go to Europe, and you'll know, I think a lot of people that are cow people and love their animals, they'll step into a facility and they'll say, this feels right, this is good or this is bad. So I think it's doing your research and making sure, no matter what we do, I was talking to a farmer there today, and we're talking about shade versus sunlight. And he said, well, if we run the shade this way, we get more sunlight in, which dries the pack out. But if we run the shade this way, we get them out of the sun. So one versus the other. So you've got to look at your application and make sure you have all those discussions before you go and start digging and putting concrete down and putting infrastructure down.
Mike, I'm getting the impression here that there's, from farmer to farmer in every different region, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all for these cow hotels.
I believe so. I think that's one of the things when we sit down with people. So we're doing a concept master plan, and we sit down with someone and work with the likes of JGM, who's done a lot of work in Australia, that knows the market. And you say, what do you want to achieve within your business, and how many cows do you want to milk? And then you're building it back from there. And one thing we find is, if we're putting in one facility, we want to make sure, if we're milking 800 cows, we want to be able to show we can milk 1,600 cows. I know it sounds like a lot, but if you say milking 200 cows, you want to make sure we can milk 400 cows. We're not painting ourselves into a corner, which is something that Jake Martin often talks about. So I think being really individual for your farm, and so what we're doing is really essentially building a bit of a plan, so in yourself on how your facility is going to work. You've got some concept of what it looks like. So instead of going to the market and saying, being that person that goes into a baby shop and says, I'm about to have a baby, what do I do? You've actually got a plan and said, look, I've talked to some good parents and they've said, this is what I need to do. So give me this, and give me this, and this is what we're going to do. So I think there's a lot of talking to farmers and designers and people that are in the systems before you go out and say, I just need to build a cow hotel. Like I want to do some planning before. So I think, and that's something that came out of Raise the Roof, was building a team of people around you that can talk you through and get you through this process from a grazing system to a PMR to a TMR or to a full housing setup. You have to do your research, because sheds, steel, concrete infrastructure costs a lot of money, and you have to look at it for a long time if it's wrong.
Mike, are we seeing more shedding systems being implemented alongside robots as well? I mean, we are seeing more and more farmers, look down the path of robot milkers. Is there a lot more of those designs and those systems coming into play as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think automation is something that it's very big in certain parts of the world. And with, like, that doesn't matter who you talk to at the moment, labour shortage is a huge issue. Yeah. No matter, full stop, no matter what industry you're in, and to have a systemated approach to farming, and that's where I think that's probably a comment we haven't made, is why a lot of people go into these systems, because every day is the same, and you can look after your staff. You don't look after your staff, but you can give them the same job. You can say, right, your job today is bedding, your day today is feeding, and it doesn't change whether it's pouring with rain or it's super hot. So I think that's part of a systems-based approach, but I think it's also, there's an automation approach to that as well, and things like robot milking. And we saw that at Raise the Roof with a new Lally facility down in northern Victoria, which was very very sought after, and a lot of people wanted to see that. So I think automation is a huge part of it, and I think a lot of people are going down that, and I think that's part of the planning process, where you have to look at how we're going to automate this, how we're going to put this into place. So I think it's an exciting space, and I think technology is getting better, it's getting more accessible, and it's getting easier to run is the big thing. So it's a really exciting space. And I think farmers that are probably coming on the farm, like if you're looking at getting an 18-year-old to come onto a farm, you've got an automated system and you've got an app on your phone that's telling you how your cows are ruminating, what you're feeding your cows, all this sort of, and I think it's getting your head around to make it super easy. But automation is really, really cool, and it's not in the future. It's actually here now, and it's happening around our world, and going to happen in this market too. So it's quite exciting.
Now I know I'm going to take us to the future. Where do you see the future of these shedding systems going? Like, what's the big plans long term? Is there some radical ideas in terms of just how profitable and how beneficial we can make these sheds for dairy farming systems?
It's probably, this is just a Mike Ryan base, so this is based on no one else we work with. But I think one of the things in our industry is, especially with things like people talking about climate change and our input on the climate, I think we can see, and I think we probably need support in doing this as an industry from outside our industry, whether that's investment or government funding to be able to pave paths for us. But as in automated systems, which we've chatted about, but I think we could almost take some of these systems off the grid. Methane is one of those things, but it's been turned into power. Yeah. So we'll see milk on the shelves, which will be carbon-free milk, or whether that's a thing, or someone might phrase that now, but where we're actually able to take the cow, we're able to feed the cow, we're able to look after her super well, and see her in those really stressful environments, top temperatures and worse wet temperatures, keeping a constant production in her, and actually make power from what she's giving us on their end. So she's making milk one side, but she's making power the other side, and see these systems actually retain themselves and pull them off the grid. And I see that as a really exciting thing for anyone, and it doesn't matter. This is really cool that people can come into the dairy industry and not have ever milked a cow, and they can say, I want to work in agriculture and I want to work in tech. So you say, right, software, this is the algorithm we need used, or I want to work in mechanical engineering. To say, right, this is a system here. Or I want to work with the animal. I love animals. And you can push them into these, not push them into these systems, but work out these systems and say, right, whatever aspect. It's a bit like I'm a rugby player, or I used to be a rugby player, but I love rugby because there's a position for every person. The fat, the tall, the skinny, the fast, the slow. And it's the same thing, you attract a lot of people because you can get a diverse range of people. And that builds our skill base in the industry, and you've got a lot of passionate people. We're all working in the same industry, and we're all doing different things, but we're all, enjoying ourselves and pushing the industry on. So I see it as a really cool thing.
No, I couldn't agree more, Mike. I mean, I'll admit when I first travelled to the US, one of the I guess, more exciting farms I saw, and I'll admit I went to the US to look at cows, but this was a particular system that they milked thousands of cows, and when it came to waste, I mean, they basically stored the manure, and they were able to keep it in these tanks and trap the methane, and they were helping power the town next door. I mean, the future and the possibilities of this are endless. And if operations are looking at those sort of carbon neutral type systems as well, and I know it seems to be more and more farmers are looking for those options too, as they invest in solar and things like that too. So incredibly exciting. Now, Mike, I'm going to take us to obviously something that's pretty close to the heart of the podcast of Around the Barn, to International Dairy Week, and of course a shedding system that houses International Dairy Week is over there in Tatura, and the fans, they're quite a specific point in there.
Yeah. No, that was obviously a wonderful install to do, and it was a problem that I remember going, or being in the shed before the fans went in, and seeing the difference. And we went there, I think when they first got installed, we went back and just did a little bit of checking before anyone before not the exhibitors, but the crowds came in, and we were able to turn different things off in that building, which was really exciting. I remember that if people have been there, that there's end wall fans on the thing, and we always talk about air exchange, and we talk about humidity in a building. So if the humidity is, we all know on really humid days we feel uncomfortable, and on cold days, if it's humid, you feel uncomfortable, you feel colder. So one of the things we tried to do in that building was actually change the air through that facility. And I remember sitting there with my little reader, which I can tell, airspeed and humidity and everything else. And we turned the end wall fans off, and we saw the humidity just go up and up and up and up. And just, you could see it. And we switched them back on, and down it went, and down it went. And the comfortability, we've all been in that building in January, and it's hot. And so when you saw that humidity level come down, I felt comfortable, and I thought, isn't this wonderful that we can do this for humans?
Yeah.
And actually, we've got cows going around in that ring, and I always love it when you see a cow stop just in front of the fan, and she stays there and wants to bask in it. So it's lovely to see, but that feelability, and I think that's one of the things we've got to get to. That cows are just like us.
Yeah.
They love to be comfortable, and we're able to do that and show that in that facility. So that's been really it's something that I just got the back of, but being involved in that system was a career highlight, I'd say, for sure.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. Certainly some very insightful points that we covered in terms of the future of shedding systems and dairy farms across Australia. Thanks for joining us.
No, it's wonderful to be a part of it, and keep up the great work.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Around the Barn. We hope you enjoyed hearing from each of our guests. If you like what we're talking about, make sure you hit the share button. That's all we've got time for. We'll see you next time.